Manipulation in and of itself is a neutral term, that there can be positive, ethical manipulation, and there can be negative, the dark side manipulation. And when you read Robert Cialdini's work, or even some of Stephen Covey's work, and how do you get people to change their mind and influence and persuasion, there are absolutely ethical ways to do that and ethical applications. And there are no doubt unethical ways and unethical applications for it as well. And oftentimes for us, and again, this gets to emotional intelligence, is understanding how and why not only we can persuade others, but we can be persuaded as well.
Hello, and welcome to episode 94 of the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I'm your host, Brittney-Nichole. Today's guest is a friend of mine whom I met through a panel discussion in Canada, and we just so happened to both be from Charlotte, North Carolina. Today's guest is Michael Reddington. Michael is an expert at moving people from resistance to commitment. As a certified forensic interviewer, he's achieved the highest professional designation available in the field of interview and interrogation and spent over a decade training investigators around the world on successful applications of non-confrontational interview and interrogation techniques. Michael transitioned from professional interrogation to executive resources after uncovering the hidden parallels between investigative interviews and critical business conversations. His research has led him to develop the discipline of listening method and teach executives, business development professionals, and human resource leaders how to reduce missed opportunities and inspire commitments to action in all their conversations. So without further ado, here's someone I consider a friend and a guest for this podcast episode, Michael Reddington. Well, Michael, hello.
Hey, how
Long
are you?
time no see since yesterday, right?
I know.
So welcome to the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I'm very excited to dive in a topic that we were on a panel together talking about emotional intelligence during a virtual setting or virtual emotional intelligence. And we just went down a rabbit hole on that casual conversation. So I'm looking forward to diving into that today. But before we do that, I would love for you to introduce yourself in your own words to our listeners and viewers.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And again, thank you very much for having me. So I am an executive resource and certified forensic interviewer. I parlayed my career as a professional interrogator into serving executives and sales teams and HR teams with my disciplined listening method. So essentially what we do is we help people use the truth to their advantage by applying strategic and ethical observation and persuasion skills.
So you're saying that you put people in a very small confined room, you turn all the lights off, you sit them at a still table with a light hovering over their head and pound your fist on the table. Is that what you did?
Yeah, and if that doesn't work, we go with the car battery and the waterboard, right?
Oh, yeah.
How it's supposed to work. Yeah. When people hear the word interrogation, they tend to jump right to those visuals. Like anytime I mention it, it generally gets one of two reactions. Sometimes I get, cool, tell me more. But usually I get the, stay away from me, this conversation is over. I think people would really be surprised to know what people are willing to say and do for you when you're nice to them and help them save face and protect their self-image. Literally, that's the secret sauce. Help avoiding people from feeling embarrassed, help them save face and protect their self-image, treat them with respect, and people will be astounded with what others are willing to tell and do for them.
That's such a good point. I feel like people try to do the reverse of that. They're like, I'm going to get this out of you, whether you like it or not. That force, and that causes people to retreat or build that wall, become defensive, whatever the case may be. It definitely doesn't open people up by any means.
Not at all. All too often, and it's not just interrogators, it can be for parents, it can be for leaders, managers, sales professionals, negotiators. They go into a conversation, and whether they realize it or not, it's all about winning. I need to get this person to say or do X. So in order to get them to do X, what do I need to say? What do I need to do? So this isn't about creating an experience or establishing a relationship. This is about doing whatever I think I need to say or do to satisfy my own ego in the process.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
When in reality, we shouldn't be asking ourselves, what do I need to say to Brittney to get her to do what I want her to do? It should be, what does Brittney need to experience in order for her to commit to saying or doing what I want her to say or do, which reframes the process and generally leads to a much more successful outcome.
So would you say that you would go along the lines of the good cop versus the bad cop, the good cop, bad cop scenario? Or do you play both roles sometimes?
I try to play neither. Good cop, bad cop is another one that people talk about all the time. It has some very, very real limitations. There's potentially legal and ethical, and we can dive down the false confession rabbit hole another time if you want to.
Oh gosh, yeah.
But maybe the biggest one is anyone that's watched at least one episode of Law and Order sees it coming. So when they see the good cop, bad cop, they say, well, I know they're playing a game now, so I don't have any real motivation in order to share the truth. Really, it's like I said, it's about treating people with respect and dignity and communicating with them in a way really where we educate them, we allow them to reframe and shift their own perspective and allow them to choose what to tell us, why, and when, as opposed to making it more of a confrontational conversation where we're trying to trap somebody or make them feel like they don't have an option. That's where we're more likely to get either nothing, limited information, or a false confession. And we really want to avoid all three of those. Our goal is to get the truth.
Man, that is so needed in today's world. If everybody could apply that, I mean, at a personal level with your relationships, like you said, with your kids, teachers, employers, in the political system, goodness gracious, we'd be in such a better place if people focused on the needs of others first, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. So let's start to talk about, because all of that ties into emotional intelligence, everything you're speaking of, because you have to be hyper aware. You have to be able to read and understand what the other person may be feeling, read their body language, their tonality, their gestures, even pick up on subtleties in their speech to find that hidden message. And so I love that we were brought together for this panel discussion, which, like you said, was just mind-blowing that two people from the Charlotte area are brought in to speak on a panel in Canada. Like, what are the odds?
Crazy.
Yeah. And so our topic for discussion was how to be emotionally intelligent virtually, or virtual emotional intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you said, I think it would be a great idea if you and I chatted before we're on this panel together to get to know each other. And what I think was scheduled for like maybe 15, 30 minutes turned into, I think, an hour or longer conversation. Yeah, because we just connected and we went down this rabbit hole together, because you and I were both kind of laughing at the fact that let's talk about virtual emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence is emotional intelligence is emotional intelligence.
I'll rest my case.
It can apply to every facet of life. It doesn't matter whether you're halfway across the world or alone by yourself. Because someone told me recently in a conversation, she was like, well, I guess, your business may have slowed down because emotional intelligence is about dealing with people. And I'm like, that's one component, but I would say 80% of emotional intelligence is dealing with yourself. And then that 20% is applying that to working with other people and ensuring that you're keeping yourself in check and not allowing your perceptions and biases to get in the way and controlling any emotions that arise, right?
Agree, totally.
Yeah. So let me get your thoughts on, do you notice any difference at all? Because let's tell our listeners and viewers what happened. You didn't really get to give your 2 cents.
Why you got to out me like this?
He left me alone.
I did. High and dry. Good job.
It wasn't intentional, but your mic just happened to uninstall itself.
Literally.
Yeah, like right before we were supposed to talk together. So I never really got to hear your input. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think my thoughts, and thank you again for outing me to your entire audience. I appreciate that. My thoughts really echo yours. That for me, emotional intelligence is emotional intelligence. And how we use our emotional intelligence may shift a little bit from context to context. So am I, to steal a word from my background, am I interrogating why I'm feeling or reacting a certain way in a certain situation? Okay, well, I'm going to apply emotional intelligence to myself, like you said. Am I at a networking event? For you and I, are we at a business consulting event? Are we giving a presentation or leading a session, reading our audience, interacting with the group, determining their needs? Am I speaking with my wife? Am I dealing with my 4-year-old son and whatever his phase is this week and whatever he's going through? Is it in person or is it virtual? Is it through email? Emotional intelligence is emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, when it comes to the virtual conversations, it's more of, are there any slight shifts or additional focuses we may need to keep in mind? And my biased opinion, and I would love to hear your response to this, I don't think it's so much that our emotional intelligence needs to shift at all on virtual conversations. Our contextual awareness does. So perhaps the biggest lesson I learned in the world of interview and interrogation is that you never know what somebody else is experiencing.
Right.
The vast majority of people I ever spoke with, suspects, victims, witnesses, all of them, the vast majority of them were good people to great people that were experiencing something new, unique, different in their life that caused them to make, as I like to say, regrettable decisions. Like, they're not necessarily bad people, but they made bad choices due to situations that they didn't know how to handle otherwise. Right. So learning that and really allowing that to help reframe how we connect people to obtain the truth was critical. And if we spin that to virtual conversations, this might be your 785th Zoom conversation this week. I need to keep that in mind. I don't know, well, we talked a little bit before our interview, so I do know a little bit about how your day went today, but I might not know what your day has been like or what your evening may be like. What else is going on at your location right now? So if I'm trying to read your behavior, I honestly have to ignore a whole lot of your nonverbal communication because I don't know if your husband's walking in front of you, if your dog's jumping up and down, if something just changed, you've got a TV on silent so you can watch the financial news while we're having this conversation. Like, literally, there could be any number of things going on around you that could cause your nonverbal behavior to change. So I don't want to ignore it, but I've got to keep that contextual awareness high. So one of the things we like to say in virtual conversations, really in anything, but we're talking about virtual here, is focus on what we do have, not what we don't have. So I want to pay a much larger attention to some of the things you mentioned, the tonality, the word choice, the speed of delivery, maybe any hesitation, pauses. When we talk about emotional intelligence, words often convey hints of emotion, if not blatant descriptions of emotion, but at least hints of emotion. So I really want to focus on those things to drive my contextual awareness. So I may have rambled on you. I'll wrap it up. But really for me, it's emotional intelligence is emotional intelligence, but specifically with virtual, how do we really tune in our contextual awareness to other factors that may be impacting the conversation so we're getting a more complete read on the communication?
Michael, that is, honestly, I don't think I've ever heard someone phrase it the way that you did. It really crystallized it for me. And that was never something I thought about, right? Because I'm in my office. If my dog's in here with me, he's usually just laying on the floor. If I know my husband's going to be doing things, I'll close my door so I don't have any distractions. But not everybody does that. Not everybody has the ability to do that depending on where they are. And I didn't even think about what could potentially go on. Like, what if you have a puppy that's chewing on your shoe and you don't want to break your eye contact if you're being spoken to by someone, but at the same time, you're like, you know, and so now you're looking at this person, but really you're like trying to get your dog from biting your shoe.
Yeah.
Or your toddler could be climbing up on you, but it's not in range for other people to see. And so you're just kind of like looking down. It could, you know, you look distracted even though you're listening. Really good points. And one thing that I will say, and I would love to hear your take on this, being a speaker yourself, with virtual speaking engagements, I can deal with not everybody being on camera. All I need is a handful of people so I can get a general reaction see how the majority is gauging, my speech. But I once had 26 people who attended a workshop all off camera, and it was it's a workshop. You're supposed to get involved. And people were putting their comments and replies only in the chat. Nobody was coming off mute. And it was a horrible experience for me because I didn't know how people were really feeling about it. I am not good, and I don't think many people are truly good at multitasking, but it was hard to read the comments in the chat, look at my notes, and I said, guys, I can't do this. You're going to have to come off mute. If you want to have a conversation, please come off mute because I can't see you. And reading this, it's just, I feel so disconnected from you. And so for me, that's where that emotional intelligence, I guess in that case, was me communicating how I was feeling to them instead of dealing with it.
Yeah.
And I think people fail to communicate that because it's uncomfortable. But have you ever had situations, since you've been speaking virtually, that have been really awkward and uncomfortable?
I have. I've had some where they use platforms where I literally couldn't see anybody. Like it wasn't a typical Zoom or Teams meeting. I've had some where for whatever reason I had technical difficulty. So once the screen populated, like all I could see was my presentation. I lost them. I'll speak to the dealing with it side first, and then I'll get to the communicating it side, because I do believe that sometimes we have to deal with things, but sometimes we just choose to, because it's easier for me just to deal with this than to become vulnerable or take another risk in order to communicate it.
Right.
From the dealing with it side, and I don't mean for this to sound trite or hollow in any way, for me, it almost just becomes trust myself and trust my material. Like nothing is perfect. Nothing is ever, at least nothing I've ever done, has ever been 100% beloved or appreciated. But generally speaking, the vast majority of time, the vast majority of people typically enjoy and respond well to what I generally do. So knowing that, it's just sort of trusting that and just doing what I normally do. And if I am sticking to what has generally worked for me in the past, and there's some risk there, legacy bias, I understand, but if I'm sticking to what generally has worked in the past, then more than likely, I'm going to be relatively okay when this is all said and done. So I try to shift my focus from the group, silly as this might sound, to my performance. Mm-hmm. Because if I shift it to my performance, then hopefully that resonates with the group. In regards to communicating it, I do think in a way that's a brave and bold move, because now we're showing a little bit of vulnerability to the audience, which should hopefully help them be a little bit more vulnerable as well. There's no one right way to do anything, and everybody has their own default personality approach, what works for them. When I teach public speaking, I tell people that the 3 rules for public speaking are know your stuff, know your audience, and know yourself. And I have watched speakers really, really struggle who had a decent grasp on what they were teaching and were operationally familiar with their audience. Like they weren't ignorant. They had at least enough to be in the conversation.
Right.
But they weren't acting like themselves. And because they weren't acting like themselves, not only did they come across as inauthentic or insincere, but they stumbled more. Because instead of just being true to themselves and focusing on the quality of their content, they were trying to play a role. So you talk about multitasking. Now I'm trying to teach and I'm trying to be somebody different at the same time. Like that's not going to go well. Yeah. So if somebody's introverted, be introverted. Someone's extroverted, fine. If someone loves to be funny, be funny. If someone's a little bit more serious, then be more serious. And let the quality of the message carry the day as opposed to try to be somebody else. So with that, for me, I like to try to use a little bit of humor, keeping it hopefully well within the bounds of appropriateness, and make it about me. So I don't know if people may be watching or listening to this once it's posted. I've been bald since I was 17 years old. So I got used to this a long, long time ago. But for me, if too many people have their cameras off, I'll literally make a joke and say, I know it's late in the day, or I know it's early in the morning. I have had a terrible hair day. I know what it's like to not want to be on camera. If you got your kids with you, great. If you got your dog with you, please get them up so we can see them. This is a workshop. We're going to all need each other's participation to get the most out of it. I would really be grateful for everyone to take a second and throw on their cameras. So that way I kind of give it a reason, make the joke at my expense to hopefully lighten the mood. And then whoever the first person is, I thank them and give them credit for breaking the ice. So if you were the first person to come on, Brittney, thanks for taking the risk and jumping in. I really appreciate it. Now that the ice is broken, hopefully everybody else feels a little bit more comfortable. And that usually gets a 3 more, I didn't mean to say 3, but a couple more, 3 or 4 more to hit the camera and jump on board. So at least now I've got a few people to interact with.
Yeah, that's great. That made me think about, for me, because this is the most made up that I've been in I don't know how long. Like, I got ready because I had to go to an actual physical in-person event. But normally I just throw my hair up in a messy bun and have no makeup on, right? And so I even thought about, well, if people have a long, tired day, I'm one that I would have my makeup removed beside me. It's like, if you're worried about how you look, well, I'm going to take my makeup off. Here, we're in this together. I'll put my hair up in a messy bun. I don't care. But yeah, I don't know where that line is, though. When you're the subject matter expert, some people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to see that side of you being a professional. And I guess that's where you just have to say, well, this is who I am, be confident with yourself and not really worry, because you can't make everybody happy.
No,
you're always going to
never.
make somebody upset.
Never. And honestly, if you don't, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. If you don't have enemies, then you're not doing something right. That's sad.
I'm not encouraging
it's sad,
anybody to be a hot take artist or say crazy things for attention. Like, do everything we do with quality and sincerity and good motives and do the right thing, and I'll do that. But with that, somebody somewhere is not going to like it. And that is, in a lot of ways, your first indication you're doing well. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think within a reasonable bounds, being yourself is important. And being a subject matter expert doesn't take away from being a human being. Just like being a mom or dad doesn't, just like being a coach doesn't, just like being a leader, an executive, a manager. None of that takes away from being a human being. So, I can't show up wearing a sleeveless t-shirt with a can of beer for a 2:00 in the afternoon session, but having personality and being authentic, people tend to gravitate to that. Even if your brand of authentic isn't their brand of authentic, they can still see that. Like, okay, he's a legit human being. He's not a robot. This isn't a rote off-the-shelf thing that he's done for 1,000 other people. So to a degree, I think being yourself is really important within whatever professional bounds you're comfortable with. But I think, and this is my bias, pour as much salt out as you want, but for everybody, whatever your professional role is, being the trustworthy, reliable human being, the guide, the leader, the coach, the teacher, the shepherd, whatever word you want to use, doing that with your own individual personality will likely lead to quality results quicker than putting on a mask and trying to do it, because now we're trying to stay in character, which takes away from emotional intelligence and makes it more difficult to achieve the results.
And two, it's sad, but it's true that even when we're our authentic self, sometimes it makes it harder to get people to see the value that you bring. Even though, like you said, your outward appearance doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change the information and the knowledge and the wisdom that you have or your ability to perform at all. But we are very shallow creatures as a society. And it's amazing these small things that turn people away from connecting with you. I have tattoos, none of which are visible. Yeah, I have a whole side piece. My entire side is one big piece. Nobody would ever know it though, because you can't see it when I have, professional clothes on. But I think of people that do have visible tattoos and how that has hindered them from getting certain positions in their career just due to the perception. I have friends that are Black, and they talk about not getting hired because they had braids in their hair. And it's like, are you kidding me? You didn't get the job because you had your hair in braids. Like, that is absolutely ridiculous to me. So, and beards, like, hey, you've got a beard. How many years back would you have never got a speaking engagement because you had facial hair?
When I was hired by my previous company, who I still love, the co-founder of that company, who was like an uncle to me, like I can't say enough good things about him. When they hired me, I knew they had more of a conservative outward appearance approach. So I shaved my beard down just to the goatee and trimmed the goatee. And then after I was there for a while, I slowly kind of built it back out. And I love this man, please. I tell this story because I think it's funny. He had kind of dropped some hints on me about shaving my beard. I've had facial hair in some way, shape, or form longer than I haven't, like throughout the entire course of my life. And
it just went from the top down, right?
Yeah, it fell.
You lost it on top and it just
it fell and got stuck. So my mom came to visit me when I was living out in Chicago. She came to see a seminar that I was leading, and then I took her out to lunch. And when I took her out to lunch, a couple of guys from the company came out to meet her. And when we're standing in line to order, the founder looks at my mom, and I wish I could remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, so what do you think Michael should do with his beard? I'm pretty sure that's exactly what he said. And my mom's awesome. She literally looks at it, puts her hand up on my face and says, I love it. I can't ever remember what he looked like without it. And I literally looked at him. I'm like, are we done now? But it's true. There was a guy who worked for that company who, again, I have nothing but respect for. But the first time he walked by me in the hall, shaved head, beard, I don't have a lot of options. This is sort of what I got to work with. Looked at me and said, so is this what we look like now? He was a much older, retired police officer who's used to being clean shaven his entire life. Again, a great, great dude. Like, I want to make sure that is clear. We all have preconceived notions and expectations that we take into every single conversation. And for me, part of emotional intelligence, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is overriding that. So I've at least found 3 research studies, and I say I've at least found, there's probably more, is what I mean to say, that we are capable of judging somebody's trustworthiness within 100 milliseconds of seeing their face and within 500 milliseconds of hearing their voice. We're also capable of categorizing them, filing them within one of our previously existing mental models within 150 milliseconds. And if I recall correctly, I didn't plan on quoting this, so I might have to pull it out of my filing cabinet. But we don't just judge their trustworthiness. I think we judge their intelligence, their attractiveness. There's a couple more, like literally that fast, just by making these quick snap decisions that are based on our entire life history.
Right.
So I'm a big believer that a lot of emotional intelligence is go ahead and make that initial reaction, because that's how our brains are wired. Right. So if anybody tells you they don't do that, they're lying. Like, it's literally how our brains are wired. But realizing that we do it. Okay, I just snap judged Brittney. Fair or unfair, that's how my brain works. I can't change that. But what I can do is realize that I just did it. I can ask myself, why did I just do it? Like, what was the trigger that tripped it? And now I can say, well, wait a minute. Why am I talking to Brittney today? What should I really be observing for that will be a true indication as the value Brittney may add to this situation? And you're right. For a lot of people, they don't do that because they're either reliant on whatever has gotten them this far in their life is good enough. Again, legacy bias. They don't feel like they have the time. They don't pay attention. They don't think it's important enough. Maybe any other number of reasons.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you're right. I mean, I make snap judgments all the time, every day, all day long. But it's all about being conscious of when you are doing that. Obviously, if a certain person's walking down the street and they look potentially homeless by the way their hair looks or what they're wearing, I'm a little more protective. I check my locks on my door just to make sure. Does that mean they're a bad person because they look homeless? Of course not. Does it mean a bad person? They're homeless. No, it doesn't. But it's again, that programming that, when I was growing up, my mom would always be very wary and cautious, like locking the doors in the car immediately if somebody is on the side of the road. Or, walking past a homeless person and they're talking to themselves and you're kind of like, most people are harmless. They're not going to hurt you. But it's that fear, that instinct of like, I don't know this, I'm not comfortable with it, therefore it's a threat, right? And also, my friend, he went to a very small town school and he went to his 10-year class reunion and was like, I really need to clean up my Facebook friends because they just look like thugs. He was like, they're great people. But my friends look like thugs. And I don't want my new manager to look at my friends group, because some managers do that. Some employers do that. They look and see who you're connected with. And he was like, I'm really torn. I was like, well, again, I can't tell you what to do. I mean, if they're great people, then that's your choice. Like, I wouldn't want to defriend people that are good people just because of how they dress. But I also understand the concern that you don't know how your manager, your employer may use that to judge you at the same time. So what would you say to that? Where do we draw the line in just saying, I'm willing to accept this as a potential obstacle for me, but I'm not going to unfriend someone? Or what would you, because that's kind of virtual, right? Virtual emotional intelligence, being aware of what you post on social media, who you're connected with, who you share post about. So what would you say to that?
And hey, take my thoughts and advice with as many shakers of salt as you can get your hands around. For me, it goes back to lessons that even my parents taught me. I think back to conversations with my father, certainly different leaders I've worked with along the years. But it's like I was raised before we grew up before the internet. So it wasn't keyboard warriors, it was telephone tough guys before the internet. And, one of the things that my father used to always tell me was, don't ever say anything that you wouldn't say to somebody's face. Just don't. If you're not going to, if they were staying in the room and you wouldn't say it, then why are you saying it now? Like this false sense of safety or security or whatever, just don't say it. And so that's how I was raised. I didn't always adhere to that in full discretion, but especially through my professional career, when it came to leading and providing guidance and interviewing in the different roles that I had. And don't ever say anything in a room, especially a professional room, that I wouldn't say if that person is in the room. And I think that translates to what we post online as well. Like, if we're going to post something, it should be something that we're willing to own.
Yeah. We
think it is important enough, it represents who we are enough, that we're going to post it and we're willing to own it. And right, wrong, or indifferent, and this is a blanket statement about any and all content. Right, wrong, or indifferent, people are going to perceive it through their own lens. They're going to assume it to mean what they assume it to mean. So if we are going to post or share something, then we are basically agreeing to the contract that other people are going to perceive it how they want to. And that goes the same with how we dress. That goes the same with how we wear our hair. That goes the same with the kind of vehicle we drive, the kind of music we listen to. It doesn't matter. People are going to perceive that to mean what they perceive it to mean based on their perception. So when it comes to what we share, how we present ourselves virtually or in person, I should have said, we're never perfect. There's going to be mistakes and things we'd like to have back. And even times we misunderstand something. Like, how many times have I not, I don't mean I dressed inappropriately, but I didn't dress appropriately for an event. Like, I should have wore a suit coat, or I should have wore a suit and I wore jeans. Like, how many times have I missed a step just because I didn't truly understand the event? So I didn't quite present myself the way I wish I should have. It's happened to all of us. As often as possible, we should look to present ourselves in a way that is consistent with how we would like to be perceived. Now, with that, as listeners, as observers, we should be observing for value.
Right.
Again, we're going to have our first quick impressions. We can't unwire our brain. But if we're interviewing somebody for a job if we are connecting with somebody at a networking event, if we are having a business negotiation or providing performance feedback to one of our employees. I know you do a lot of work with families. If I'm talking to my wife, if I am raising my son's starting to play sports, if I'm meeting the coaches and the parents that he's going to play sports with, when I'm in those conversations, I want to be observing for value. The fact that people look different should be a good thing. The fact that they come from different backgrounds should be a good thing. So I want to start looking and listening and observing for what is the potential value that they bring into the conversation. And one of the rules, rule is a strong word, but I'm going to use it. One of the rules that interrogation taught me to live by is if I have a conversation with somebody for at least 10 minutes and I don't learn one thing from them, that's a me problem. That's not a them problem. Like, my mind literally wasn't open to the fact that there was value they could possibly offer to me. So that's a me problem. That's not a them problem. So literally going into every interaction, forcing ourselves to maintain that learning mentality. Listening equals learning. If we're not learning, we're not listening. So what type of value is out there that we could try to obtain in any interaction, regardless of what somebody looks like, what their Facebook page says, or what their situation happens to be today?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. If you're not learning, you're not listening. Can I steal that from you?
Please do.
I love that. If you're not learning, you're not listening. Because that's so true. We can take away something every single time. So I'm hosting an event about energy management and emotional resilience. And I was sending some invites out, and this one person messages me back and says, thanks, but I'm already a military psychologist and I help people with PTSD and blah, 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 right? Goes down. What I hear him say is, I already know enough. I don't want to know anything else. You're not going to tell me anything that I don't know. That's how I translated that. And so my reply was, I appreciate you letting me know that. It sounds like you're comfortable with the knowledge base that you have. And I let that go because I wanted to point out that, and it's so unfortunate because what I have found, even within myself, when I feel like that I know enough, I don't know anything. And the more that I learned, I realized how much I didn't know, how ignorant I actually was. And that seems to be the case with most people, right? There's actually a name for it. And what was really funny is I went to his profile. He had nothing on his background about psychology. But to me, I just saw insecurity, person who thinks they know more than they actually know. But I want to talk about that because some people can really trick you. I feel like I'm an emotionally intelligent person, fairly emotionally intelligent, above like the average, right? But I still get fooled by people, just like today. And we won't talk too deeply about what happened today, but the point is I got captivated by this person and I just got a really good vibe from them. And as we were talking before, you said, well, they're probably still a great person. Maybe it's just an attention thing. But I just got drawn into their story. But at the same time, there was that like, be wary. I don't think this is fully the truth. And sometimes people can really dance on both sides of that fence with you, of where you really want to trust them and engage with them and connect with them. And so you gravitate towards that. And then once you kind of, I don't know the word, like once you're really in the deep end with them, like you're telling other people you know them and you build that relationship. And then later you find out that they were a fraud. All that stuff was made up. And then you don't know what to do. At least for me, I'm like, what do I do now? Like, I have put my name with this person. Is that me being unemotionally intelligent? You know, how am I supposed to navigate that?
That's you being a perfectly normal human being. There's been a lot of great work written, and I'm happy to share some resources with you if you want to post them in the notes or whatever after the show for everybody. But I'll default to start with the research that a man named Tim Levine is, I want to say, most famous for. Is probably the work that is related to him the most on truth bias and truth default theory. So literally as human beings, we are biased towards believing that somebody else is telling the truth, is being honest with us. And generally, we have to be in some sort of situation or experience some sort of trigger to kick us out of that truth bias, to kick us out of that truth default, in order for us to say, well, wait a minute, hang on. So a lot of his research, and by the way, that's good. We've evolved that way. It saves us time because the vast majority of time, the vast majority of people are basically honest and truthful with us. And if we were super cynical and assume the opposite, it'd be a really miserable and unproductive way to live. So it's a good thing that we're all wired that way. Unfortunately, there are people that are out there that intentionally take advantage of that. And there are people out there that probably unintentionally take advantage of it as well, which might have been the situation more that you were talking about today. Might not have been a con person per se, but somebody else who had a different set of needs in that conversation. So in order to help guard against that, again, we talk about contextual awareness, and this does relate to emotional intelligence. When am I in a situation where somebody might be more likely to want to mislead me? And in those situations, I should probably pay closer attention. Or if I'm having a conversation with somebody and I've had conversation with, in quotes, similar people in similar situations, that doesn't necessarily mean gender, age, anything like that. You know, it could be business qualifications, previous career, any number of things. I've had a conversation with a similar person in a similar situation, and this one's different. Why is this different? Let me stop back and think about, why is this different? So literally, the way our brains work, we are all susceptible to that. And if we don't see a factor that causes us to think differently, we don't, which is, to your point, you get far enough down the line and then you see the trigger or something's wrong. You're like, oh, what does that mean? How do I back my way out of this? That's actually a great sign, because a lot of people will use confirmation bias and start rationalizing it away because of all the positive experience they've already had. And they line their self-image up with the good story they've already told themselves, which makes it nearly impossible for them to actually accept the true negative story. When people get scammed, whether it's one of the online dating sites or they really get conned by a professional con person, these are the things that happen.
Even politicians, right?
Yep. So the back half of the question was, so when I realized that happened and I attached my name to somebody, what do I do? Situation to situation, that might be different. At the risk of being too, I guess, paint with too broad a brush, if that's a fair way to say it, disconnect from the person we now have a solid reason to distrust, stop associating with them or promoting them. And if we had our name tied to them in a way with a group or with a person that could reflect negatively on us, just go apologize. My bad. I got a great first impression of somebody. I've learned something else since. I certainly don't want to defame or disparage them. I could be wrong, but if you had a negative experience, I apologize for making the introduction. If you're still considering partnering with them on this, you might want to do some due diligence. I could be wrong. Again, I don't want to defame anybody's character, but you might want to do a little extra due diligence and just professionally separate yourself. And I think most of the time, most people will appreciate that, because who hasn't been there?
Yeah. That reminds me of a situation, not the one today, obviously, but another situation where I was working with someone. I introduced them to someone else, but I did say, I haven't had a bad experience with this person. However, I'm getting vibes that are telling me I should not have done business with them. And so I just want to let you know that, I have no proof that my intuition is accurate, but it's that gut feeling, right, that everybody says to listen to. And sure enough, a few months later, I get a call saying, hey, got a lawsuit now because I used this person. I'm like, I am so sorry. And they're like, no, you told me you had this gut feeling, and I just proceeded, and then this happened. But I still felt bad because I introduced them. It's unfortunate that things happen that way. But I do want to bring something else up that you mentioned about trust, because you had said that most of us trust first. And if I'm not mistaken, yesterday when I was attending the workshop you were speaking to or seminar, you talked about trust and anxiety, correct?
Yes.
And stress.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when we're under stress and we have anxiety, we cannot trust.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern is because we are in a state where the majority of people are experiencing very high amounts of stress and anxiety, how is that affecting that, right?
Yeah.
Because even if naturally we want to trust people, if we're always stressed, I feel like we're always on the defensive and we're always in that self-preservation mode.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can I trust you?
I don't know. Can you?
I don't know. Can I?
It's a great point. And I'll quote Paul Zach here, and I'll share the links to the books and resources that we talk about today. But in his work, he talks about how when we experience trust, our brains secrete oxytocin or produce oxytocin. But when we experience stress, our brains produce cortisol, and cortisol is an oxytocin blocker. So like literally neurologically, our brain starts shutting down, going into defense mode, and makes it far more difficult to trust. Because oftentimes people don't think, and again, I think this ties in real well with emotional intelligence, that trust is synonymous with vulnerability. And when we are very stressed or experiencing high anxiety, it becomes even more difficult, if not extremely difficult, to accept feeling vulnerable. Because we already do. There's already a threat somewhere that we're trying to take ourselves away from. So having to be vulnerable somewhere else at this time becomes increasingly difficult. So many times communicating with people that are under high levels of stress or high levels of anxiety really starts with beginning to calm them down first. I'm forgetting that guy's name. I will find it for you, I promise. There's a famous American interrogator from World War II. I'm not even going to take a guess at his name because I'm going to be wrong, but I'll get it for you, I promise. His job was to interrogate Japanese prisoners of war, and often officers and fighter pilots. And they were literally indoctrinated that the Americans were, in some cases, they were told the Americans are cannibals. Like they're going to do all these abusive things to you. The worst thing you could ever do is talk to an American. He would literally start every single interrogation by saying, "Thank you for talking to me. You're safe now." And because he had lived in Japan, he could speak Japanese, and he had at least conversational awareness and knowledge of Japanese culture. So he was able to talk to them in a way that helped significantly reduce their stress and anxiety and make them feel far more comfortable telling the truth. I certainly can't find a good word to say about anybody associated with the Nazis. One of the most successful interrogators in history was a German interrogator from World War II, who built so much rapport with the American officers and fighter pilots he interrogated. He would literally go for walks with them and just talk with them. He built so much rapport with them that after the war, he relocated to the United States, stayed in touch with some of the guys he interrogated. And if I recall correctly, again, I'll get you the links. I believe he was invited to some of their weddings, and I believe that some of the men he interrogated actually attended his funeral when he died in the United States after living out the rest of his life as an artist here in America. Wow. So in situations where we're talking to people who are experiencing high levels of stress and anxiety, working to communicate with them in a way where we can reduce that opens up the door to creating the trust and connecting over time to create the value we're looking for.
I feel like that could also be, that manipulation. I feel like manipulation in and of itself is seen as a negative, but it doesn't have to be, right? That's more the positive side of manipulation, where you gain people's trust before you really have built that connection with them, right? You have an agenda in mind. Other people use manipulation to push a very dangerous, toxic agenda. So I want to talk about the dark side of emotional intelligence and how people that really are good at building that rapport can use emotional intelligence to do very bad things.
100%.
And I think of Hitler. I don't want to get into politics, but we see that in politics as well. And my thing that I try to preach to people is any leader, I don't care what aisle what side of the aisle they sit on, what affiliation they have. People are people, doesn't matter. Anyone who uses fear and demeaning of others and scare tactics to get you to follow them, don't. I'm just saying, right? Because to me, like, if you truly have a mission to make the world a better place, you don't have to scare people to death. You don't have to make them think that the people that are opposing their view are the enemies and they're going to, because that's what Hitler did, right? But I feel like that bullying is becoming a part of our political system, not just in the US, but around the world. A debate isn't a debate anymore. It's a name calling session. There's no hard data behind it. Anyways. So let's talk about the dark side of emotional intelligence, right? And manipulation. So what are your thoughts on what I just said?
You're right. I believe with you that manipulation in and of itself is a neutral term, that there can be positive, ethical manipulation, and there can be negative, the dark side manipulation. And when you read Robert Cialdini's work, or even some of Stephen Covey's work, and how do you get people to change their mind and influence and persuasion, there are absolutely ethical ways to do that and ethical applications. And there are no doubt unethical ways and unethical applications for it as well. And oftentimes for us, and again, this gets to emotional intelligence, is understanding how and why not only we can persuade others, but we can be persuaded as well. And when you look at some of the automatic mechanisms of persuasion, Cialdini identified 7. One of them is liking. And we tend to like people that are like us. So the more we see similarities, the more we see shared interests in somebody, the easier it is to trust them, like them, and be manipulated, good or bad, by them. And that is something that the bad people, the bad manipulators, will often capitalize on. That they might even, you look at professional con people, they will take the time and they will research their targets, and they will have a backstory, and they will use a bit of a slow play as they get to know somebody and drip these similarities and shared interests until they gain somebody's trust through that, now to manipulate them in a negative fashion. So it very much exists. And for us, one of the things that we really focus on and assert confidently is the ethical application of what we do. Because like many tools, a hammer can build a house, a hammer could also hurt somebody. So like any tools, we're doing the right thing. We're using the right tool for the right reason in the right situation with the outcome in mind. But certainly beginning to understand how these things can impact us becomes important, because you're right, they're out there.
Very true. Well, and it's, you're saying, the hammer can build a house, and it can also hurt someone. And that's why I talk about, whenever we're emotionally intelligent, to add that compassion, because you can't hurt anyone when you're compassionate. With emotional intelligence, you can do either or. You can build something, you can damage something. But when you put that compassion, it only takes it to one side, right? And I think that's what a lot of us lack, is that genuine compassion for one another, because we've just been taught to be nice, polite. We've been taught to be polite. Here's what you say, and then what happens? You're not in front of that person, you gossip, you talk bad about them. You don't truly believe in what you say. You say you're sorry because that's just what you're supposed to say. And again, we see that with high profile people who get caught doing things that isn't socially acceptable. What do? They publicly apologize. But how many of them are genuinely sincere in their message, or they're doing it because their PR person said, hey, you got to get out there and tell them what they want to hear, else your campaign, else your business, else your whatever is going down the drain, right? Yeah. It's like a means to an end, instead of just doing it because we truly want to do that, because it's the right thing.
And that's what it should all come down to. It literally should come down to what's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it has been a pleasure speaking with you, but I do want to ask, I don't think you really talked too much about your business in the beginning. So I would love for you to kind of share a little bit about what you do, Michael, and how people can find you, and also anything you want to leave our listeners and viewers with.
I appreciate you asking. Thank you. So I am the president of Inquasive, and with Inquasive, we do focus on education. So whether that is seminars, presentations, advisory sessions on our disciplined listening method and applying those non-confrontational interrogation techniques and business communication best practices to leadership conversations, sales and negotiations, candidate interviews, conflict resolution, which we've talked a lot about, public speaking and beyond. People can learn a lot more and experience a lot more content at inquasive.com, which is INQUASIVE.com. And they can find me on LinkedIn as well at Michael Reddington CFI if they're interested. I'd certainly be happy to connect and support anybody that I can. So I thank you for asking.
Yeah, fantastic.
I think that to leave people with something, especially as it pertains to emotional intelligence, is number one, to remember that we can never fully understand or account for somebody else's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We can't. So to begin to make blanket assumptions for why somebody is thinking, feeling, acting, behaving in a certain way is a really dangerous place to be. It's not dangerous to start making informed considerations. Like, I'm not saying that we should just go into this blind, but just to make blanket assumptions. Like one of the things you said earlier, as soon as we say to ourselves, we have it all figured out, we're in trouble. Like,
yeah.
Right there, as soon as we say we've got it all figured out, that should be our first indication that we likely have nothing figured out.
Mm-hmm.
So what's difficult, because it's not how our brains are wired to do, but we need to maintain a learning mentality, looking for these new learning opportunities. How do we find value in any conversation? And if we understand that people are predisposed to protect their own self-image and protect their own interests, and we start preparing and engaging in conversations by thinking to ourselves, well, realistically, why shouldn't they want to do what I want them to do? Why haven't they already done what I want them to do? What do they need to experience in order to commit to what I really need them to do? Now we can do a much better job truly empathizing, putting ourselves in their shoes, and working towards the positive outcome that we're looking for.
That is a wonderful note to end on. Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely love that. And Michael, I will put all of the links that you're going to share in the show notes, as well as all the information where people can find you. So again, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure. This was a wonderful conversation.
It was great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.